you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. The Iron Lady sings it from the Opera Center of the Bugs Bunny Show. Do I have to pay for the trademark on that? I don't think so. I just referenced it. So there you go. When she sings it, that makes it official. Welcome to the big show, our family and friends. You know, we just recently pulled the numbers for the last 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we changed the form of the show and expanded it to include all sorts of other people, the CEOs, the billionaires, the Pulitzer Prize-winning authors, the astronauts, all the great people and minds on the show. It used to be just mostly Silicon Valley and talking about iPhones and Google for the first 10 years. But we changed the format of the show 14 years ago, and we've increased the audience on the show 1,405%. Not 100%, not 200%. 1,405%. So thanks to my audience for tuning in all these years, supporting the show, and loving everything we're doing. We couldn't do it without you. And as always, we beg, plead, grovel that you would refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss. Subscribe to the big LinkedIn newsletter, the 130,000 group over there, and all of our other places on the interwebs as well. Today, we have an amazing gentleman on the show. We're going to be talking to him about how he built his company and his company called Happyhires. He runs and we have Lindsay Tsang on the show with us today. In his career as a trained therapist, he's often encountered clients on stress leave triggered by toxic work environments. Oh, he must have talked to our employees at the Chris Voss Show. The experience highlighted a recurring theme, the profound impact of leadership on workplace well-being. Happyhires was born from a vision to transform this reality to create workplaces where people are energized and inspired by exceptional leadership. At Happyhires, Lindsay partners with CEOs and owner-operators of small to medium-sized enterprises committed to excelling in leadership. He offers strategic planning, executive coaching, job benchmarking, and dynamic team workshops. His pursuit of excellence in leadership development has led him to the final stages of a PhD in organizational psychology, specializing in leadership and positive psychology, and certification as an executive coach through the Center for Executive Coaching. When he's not coaching leaders, he spends his time with his wife, 4 children, playing a board game or two with friends, and reading avidly. That's what we love, reading books. We have so many great authors on the show. All the best, as it were. Lindsay, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming. And give us the .com of your website so people can check you out, or wherever you want people to find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, sure. It's happyhires.ca. So I am Canadian, and that's where you'll go.
There you go. We love our Canadian friends, especially when they say sorry and A. There might be some A's we bring in, and the boots. The boots always give them away. So there you go. But the nicest people on the planet over there are I always tease my Canadian friends that being next to us is like having this really bad drunken brother down south of you, where we're always picking fights, starting wars, and beating up people, and some sort of drunken stupidity that wastes a bunch of money. You guys are always up there like, do we have to get nuked when these guys get nuked? Because we're right next door to there. It's like having that drunken brother who can't control himself. Anyway, so give us a 30,000 overview of Happyhires and what you do there.
Oh, yeah. So, you did a really great introduction already. The whole story behind it is that when I did my therapy practice, I always knew I was going to work with individuals, I'll move on to couples, and then organizations next, because, everyone resonates with this, right? Having been under good or bad leadership, and the difference right away. And so that's where kind of the heart behind it is to create those places where people love their jobs. Now, I'm thinking about happiness and effectiveness, and I really think you can't have one without the other. Like if you have happiness, you're a very happy leader. but you're not effective, then you're not going to be happy very much longer. And the same the other way around. So it's really more about partnering with the individuals, the leaders, the CEOs, to help them to develop their leadership skills. And I do some strategic planning. I also do some things, role clarity and job benchmarking and things like that, those kind of services as well.
There you go. And I mentioned the bio that, you believe that leadership is innately important to people feeling fulfilled at work. I know we've talked about this ad nauseum on the show because leadership is a big deal for me and the people we've had on like yourself. I know there's stats that show that most of the time when people leave a company, it's because of poor leadership. It isn't because of what they're being paid necessarily. That may be an influence of poor leadership, but it's their bosses are jerks. They can't lead well.
Yeah. Right now, I'm just wrapping up my PhD in organizational psychology. My dissertation study is actually kind of on this topic. I have, I surveyed, we had 648 valid responses of Canadian nurses and doctors, just talking about surveying them about how they view their leader, whether they are a servant leader or not, which is someone who would prioritize the needs of the individuals over the organization.
Oh, wow.
And what I found was pretty staggering. I mean, one thing is that, as a big statistic, 46% of my respondents, who are mostly nurses and younger in Canada, are actually considering leaving their jobs.
Wow.
Which is a really high number. It's actually in line with other articles I've read as well. One of those things, and this is not from my study, but from other studies I've read, is in the context here, there's a bit of a bullying culture, and that's why a lot of younger nurses really doesn't like their job.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's kind of surprising, right? And what we see, and it's really in line with most studies, we're seeing that people who exhibit this really good servant leadership would mean that people would have higher psychological capital, which is like positive mindsets at work, which would then act as a buffer. These two things would act as a buffer for turnover intention. So people are less likely wanting to leave when they have these when we have this positive leadership causing positive mindsets.
Oh, wow. So what are the two things there?
Which two things? You mean the servant leadership and the psychological capital?
So servant leadership and psychological stuff. We talked a lot, and it seems like there's a lot of conversation moving towards servant leadership these days, and what it means. How do you define in your words and thought processes what servant leadership means?
Yeah. Okay. So servant leadership, most people know about transformational leadership, which is, you have a charismatic leader who's able to inspire transformation in somebody so that they can do better and more for a company. So if you look at the definition of servant leadership, there's actually a lot of overlap. You can see a lot of similar kind of characteristics there. But the major defining differentiator is that a servant leader is going to prioritize the follower, the individual, above that of the organization. So it's this kind of others-oriented leadership.
There you go. And it seems like that seems to be the new trend. I was probably for a lot of my years a transformational leader where, there was a lot of rah pumping and, let's go get them, coaching sort of style. And I think, some of it played into what you might call servant leadership, and realizing that you needed to help them to grow and achieve. But the servant leadership seems to be something that a lot more people are talking about these days, and what goes into it. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get in this field? How did you learn what you know? What motivated you want to get into this field?
Yeah, I just love the topic of leadership. I think I'm one of those guys who, now when I was growing up, I was really shy. So I'm kind of not a outspoken person. That changed over time, I think. But one of the funny things in my lifetime was that leadership opportunities always came my way. I never sought for them really, but I would be approached and asked to take on a higher leadership role. So I had to learn about it. I had to read books. I had to get, and it got me loving the concept and the ideas. And so when I was doing the therapy, I'm still doing therapy, but I always thought about the next step for this was moving on to helping leaders. So part of that journey took me to this PhD, which is in organizational leader psychology.
There you go. And what motivates you want to help people? What motivates you want to try and have an impact in people's lives?
Wow, I think there's a lot of factors. Faith being one of them for sure, right? Like if you think about servant leadership, right? Like the person that you tie it to is usually Jesus, right? So it's definitely about helping people. I realized in high school that I was aiming to become a computer engineer, and I was like, I realized I didn't like computers and I liked people. So all of the other roles I went into since has been about helping, nonprofit, teaching, and so I went all over the world really, but also all over the map in terms of my career. But all of it was leading towards helping people. And I think that helping leaders is going to have the biggest impact because it means helping a lot of people that follow those leaders.
Definitely. And I don't know, are you seeing market conditions? I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the U.S. market and probably in the Canadian market as well. You guys are kind of reflective of our economy, I think. What are you seeing as to why it's important more now than ever for leaders to become the best leaders they can be in the marketplace?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to touch on this quickly. One of the models that I'm following right now is called the prioritized leader. It's not made up by me, Brandon Schaefer's work. And so what the assumption there is that there are 5 priorities that every leader has to have, and it has to be in the right order. So it starts off with purpose, and then and the next thing is people, and then the third one is the pace of the organization. The fourth one is perception, which is also innovation. And finally, profit comes and follows naturally when you have those 4 lined up. And so I think especially when things are, economically not looking great, the biggest temptation is to bump that profit piece higher. And when you do that, that's when you feel there's something off, right? Yeah. Thinking of a particular client right now who is feeling really demotivated from work, and an entrepreneur has a business. And when we got to the heart of it, it was they were losing the vision of what they were meant to do because they were working on the premise of, we got to keep the doors open. We got to make sure we make more money. So they were starting to do things that were outside of the scope of what they wanted to aim for originally. So yeah, for me, it was a classic example of that, flipping the order of priorities. So yeah, more than ever, we need strong leadership with great vision.
Yeah. I would agree with you too. Purpose, people, pace, perception, and profit. Purpose, knowing what your business purpose is, knowing what your life purpose is important as well as a human being. Knowing maybe what your purpose is as a leader, being a servant leader, maybe not. I imagine it's possible to blend the transformative leader and the servant leadership into a useful case. I mean, you don't have to abandon one for the other. I think people thinking too much in black and white. You can gray those, I suppose. But purpose is really important. What is the purpose of your company? What are you trying to do? And then people, your most important asset is people. And I think too many times companies look at them as expendable. We're seeing lots of layoffs in the marketplace right now. Pace. Tell us about how pace plays into execution in servant leadership.
In servant leadership. Well, okay, so part of servant leadership is that prioritization. Another part of it is the emotional healing. So you're able to slow down and listen to people when they're hurt, right? So that's part of it. So what the PACE module is all about is really just about the predictability. The successful companies, all successful companies, the big ones with legacy, always has a predictability to them. They have so if you think about like school systems, they have a very clear, here's the summer, here's our first term, we have a break, and we have a second term. So you know what to expect, whatever stakeholder is in that, organization knows when to rest and when to work hard. Or like a really good example would be Apple, right? Like everyone knows in October is when the new launch is. So earlier in the year, they are innovating, they're testing, they're creating their new products, and then later that year, they are executing and pushing forward their products. So because of that predictability, their clients know, their customers know what to expect, but so do the workers. They get they are able to rest when necessary and execute really hard when necessary because they know the pace of the company.
There you go. Pace and how everything's operating and going. The fourth one is called perception. And this I think is really important. Being able to perceive that, you have good leadership, you can trust your leadership, that, they do what they say. That seems to be a big problem in companies where leadership teams will spit out, some sort of PR about, we're the greatest company in the world and we have high ethics and morals, and then you find out that the CEO is stealing from the company or doing some sort of illicit whatever, or just not talking his walk and walking his talk, he or she. And so perception is really everything, because if you're you can pump out all sorts of PR things, but if people aren't seeing that the reality is you are living your purpose and living what you're telling other people to do, you're not going to go far.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. I thought the same thing when I was listening. When I was learning the model. The fourth one is perception, is how people view. But it's actually not that. I think they just want to use another P word, but it's actually more about innovation for that whole part. But I agree with you in terms of like the perception or the alignment of values. That would probably go back to the first one, which is purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where you can pretend to be something else and people will know right away. So you actually have to find out in my organization what is the actual value here, like what is celebrated and works, right? Because that might be different from context to context anyways. But perception, so the innovation part is more about this continuous, integrated, like a systemized way to keep improving, whether it's internal processes or the products or the services.
Mm-hmm. And everything falls into place with the profit. If you build a good organization, a lot of people don't think about this, but building culture from the get-go, or if you're coming into the office of CEO or whatever management area you are, the tone you set, the culture you set, the environment you set, the methodology, it sets the tone for the whole organization. And right now, we live in this environment. I imagine you guys are kind of where we are in Canada, where we are now, where here in America we have a shortage of employees. I think it's been, the number's been kicked around, but I think it's about 7 million. And so we have a shortage. And what happened is we always knew the baby boomers were going to retire and we were going to have problems, but they retired early because of COVID. And some of the Gen Xers that could skip out did too as well. And so they cashed out their chips. And the problem we have is for every day we have people from the boomers retiring, and so for every 7 that retire, we only have 1 new employee coming in, and usually those 7 that retire have a lot of experience and are at the high ends of their jobs. The new people coming in, they're just journeymen coming in as the new. I think journeyman is the right term. I don't know. They're just beginners in the thing. Maybe journeyman's more experience, but so we have a real lack of employees. And so it's causing a lot of demand, especially since our economy is still growing pretty good. And so there's this fight for high quality employees and high demand. And they're, of course, they know that they're in high demand, and between the unions having more power than they've ever had before, between employees having more power than they ever had before in choices, and demanding high wages and demanding great business, you have to meet the mark. You can't just phone in leadership anymore. You've got to really lead and make your workplace a vibrant place that people enjoy, because there's a lot of options out there.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about your company, Happy Hires. What do you guys do there? Tell us about some of the offerings you guys have. Now I know you're based in Canada. Do you cover places outside of Canada?
Well, so far my clients have been local, but I'm definitely open to, because it's so easy to do coaching over to remotely. So
you can do it worldwide nowadays.
Yeah, worldwide. Yeah, so definitely I'm open to more than that. Yeah, right now the main kind of 3 areas. One is strategic planning, so that's more involved, right? That would be coming in and actually meeting the team and doing a couple of sessions together to work out that purpose level very well. Then I have some of the smaller offerings would be more like, one of my clients had a main member retiring soon. So we came together as the leadership team, discussed, as many reasons as we can for why this role exists. And we categorized those to key accountabilities. We ranked them. So it gave a lot of clarity for everyone. Or there was something they didn't know. So the CEO kind of explain to them, actually, I was hoping it to go in this direction. So everyone was like, oh, and so now they know what they're expecting. And so once we finished doing that, I would create a benchmark for them using personalities, drivers, competencies. So they together would each fill out an assessment, and we would make a composite assessment that now is going to be a benchmark. So whenever they are interviewing people, they can take the top candidates, assess them, and see how close they come to the benchmark.
And I see that they can take that assessment for free, I think, on your website.
Yeah, no, I have a different assessment. Okay. It's a diagnostic on my website, and that's just a kind of a smaller version of the bigger prioritized leader assessment. So that's more for the leader to take to kind of find out, how he scores or she scores on those 5 modules that we mentioned already. And then they can see which one's on fire, and maybe that's what they would need help with the most.
There you go. That's really important. So you can do a little self-assessment as a leader on your thing, but then you have a deeper one that you do. Tell us about, I'm looking at the website, you have coaching programs, strategic success planning, team workshops, and job benchmark facilitation service. Walk us through some of these different things that you do. I see the Elevate Your Brand Vision Mastery Program, 3 times Engagement Accelerator. Walk us through some of these programs. Yeah,
well, if you look at the titles of those ones, they're really just hitting up those 5 different modules, right? So now, as far as the coaching goes, what I like to do is create 6-month coaching engagements, just because that's how long it takes for real change to happen. And although we do have these different branded ones in terms of there's a whole module behind it that we can go through together, it doesn't have to be the main thing, really, because it's tailored. It's when we get together and we talk about your needs, it might be outside of that scope completely, and we would just have to work with that. The most important thing, though, is that we have a very, very clear idea of exactly what outcome you want in the next 6 months, and then we set goals towards it and action points towards it until you reach those. So it's a 6-month, one-on-one, bespoke, tailored coaching for executives.
There you go. People can reach out to you, engage in some of these things. So you work with companies, you work with individuals. What are you finding that most people are struggling with in your business coaching when you're talking to people and they're like, "Hey, I need help with this"? What's one of the top topics that you see people trying to square around the square on?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of 2 things right now. One of them is, I have these people who are not doing their jobs.
What?
Yeah. And I don't know how to fire them. Maybe I can't. There's all these different rules around that.
Yeah.
So what do I do? And then there's the other
fire them anyway. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that, people. Right. We're just doing comedy here, people.
Yeah. Or the other thing is just that I'm tired. I'm working so hard. So a lot of the people I'm working with now, they are small companies. And they're the owners, right? They're like, the dream is to get to a place where everyone's just doing their thing and I can be a true owner, but not quite there yet. So we need to fill in this role. We need to train that person. That's the pain points that I'm hearing. So I am, I haven't said it on the website or anywhere because I'm still developing it, but I am trying to come up with my own unique method right now, which is for exactly those pain points and those outcomes that we're looking for.
There you go. It's people have to really look at how the culture they're building, what they've done to contribute to it. It's everything. I mean, it really does always come down to leadership in my mind, and the person on the white horse, the person who sets the tone for the organization. Everything revolves from that and evolves from that. Even when it's in a large company, I mean, people look to the leader. I wrote about this in my book, Beacons of Leadership. People look to that beacon, that thing that sits on the shore and sends forth the light that says, "Hey, this is who we are," and it communicates. People look to that and they go, "Okay, so how do we direct our ship over what the leader says?" And having those lighthouses are so important in doing what that is. And if the communication is mixed or contradictory or hypocritical, People see that and they just go, "You're full of shit," as George Carlin used to say. And it's just really important that you walk your talk, you do your thing. I can think of a lot of great CEOs that do a lot of wonderful things. I'm thinking of the CEO with T-Mobile, who used to be such a great cheerleader. John, I forget his name now, but a really great guy. But you would always see him in a cheerleader position. You would always see him working amongst the frontline people, going out to events. He didn't wear the normal suit and everything else. He was a jump up and down sort of guy, and motivate teams. And people saw him as a fellow, I think, more so than he's some guy in the ivory tower, that no one sees, and every now and then he shows up in a suit. And I've been studying more leaders for my second book, and there's a lot of great leaders that spend a lot of time in the trenches. They get out there, they're dealing with the frontline people. They're doing a lot of listening sessions, a lot of servant sessions, as opposed to just being out there on a soapbox barking whatever the PR statement says. They're getting the feedback from people. Like, are we following through on living what our purpose is, on what our intention is? And I think that's real important. I think it's really come due for time, because you could try still using the old leadership method of barking orders, and if you don't follow through, we're just gonna fire you, and attitudes like that. But people demand more, and I think with the new generations too. I know millennials wanted more from work. I know Gen Z wants to feel more involved and feel like there's more of a purpose and stuff. And I imagine Generation Alpha, the next generation after Gen Z, they're just going to want more of the same. They're going to want a place that they feel like they're contributing, that matters, that they have a say, that it's doing something better for the world. I think they're just going to take that to the next level. And so leaders have to adapt or die, really, when it comes down to it, from a profit aspect.
Yeah. It made me, as you were talking, it made me think of an old movie, Kingdom of Heaven, with Orlando Bloom.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's like a blacksmith, and all these guys are having crusades fights. The Crusaders versus the Muslims, and so he created a lot of respect with his followers because he was always in the trenches literally digging trenches with them for irrigation. Yeah. And then on the fight day, him and a whole small contingent of people were out front, in front of the walls, and running straight towards the enemies. And so that was so it was the scene that just came to my mind.
Yeah.
And also thinking about the book, old book again, Good to Great. Jim Collins, Good to Great is classic. Yeah. So he went out to study why certain companies suddenly became so much greater than its peers. And the one thing they didn't want to discover, but did discover, was that it always came down to a CEO change.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was always a CEO they didn't expect. It wasn't a super charismatic person. It was actually someone very humble, someone who was really hardworking, and someone who can set the direction and the accountability of where they want to go. So yeah, it's a big deal who is at the helm.
There you go. So one thing you talk about is something you call SOAR instead of SWOT.
Yeah.
What does it mean? SWOT, SWOT.
Okay, so SWOT is what most people use in strategic planning. It's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So they get together to talk about those things, and then they use that as one of the building blocks for building. Okay, well, what's our initiatives for the next in 2 years for our strategic plan, right? I just found in my studies a model called appreciative inquiry. Have you heard of that before?
No, what was it again?
Appreciative inquiry.
No.
So it's still AI, but just different. So appreciative inquiry is, I guess you can call it a framework or a philosophy of sorts, which it's very flexible. You can work it into your company in many ways, or into your personal life in many ways. But I like to use that as a model when it comes to strategic planning. So we switch up the letters to SOAR instead of SWOT.
Okay.
And in appreciative inquiry, there's pushback against it because it kind of ignores the weaknesses and the threats. It just goes straight into what's the strengths, right? They really want to get the conversation going for what is going really, really well right now in this organization. What makes you feel fully alive? What are the stories? So you want to get this to be a collaborative experiment with lots of people, stakeholders, customers, clients, people within the organization to be having these conversations. And so it builds up this momentum and energy from it, because it's all about asking the right questions, right? Then you move on to, based on these strengths. Now, in the SOAR model, I think they actually switched it. They have opportunities and aspirations. I would like to go with aspirations first before opportunities. But you would go from, since this is our positive core, this is what makes us really click, right? Then what's the dream forward? And that, again, becomes a collaborative exercise where everyone is having conversations and dialogues, and then finally honing down at the leadership level. So what are those statements we want to put out aspirationally that we would want to become? And then from there, then you can look at opportunities. You can look at what are the strategic opportunities that we need to, or initiatives that we need to take in order to get towards that reality, that aspiration that we are facing towards. And then you move on to results, which is when you look at metrics, when you look at, how do you know we're measuring up and the to-do list to actually go and achieve it. So that's the SOAR model.
Yeah. And so probably identifying the strengths and then looking at results. The results kind of give you feedback on weaknesses. So maybe not accenting them or focusing on them so much, like, what the fuck is wrong with us? Why do we suck?
Yeah.
It can be a little disempowering or maybe disheartening, or, you can have finger pointing or lack of self-accountability, or, it's the sales department's fault, that sort of crap. So maybe just focusing on strengths and building on those, and then, seeing the weaknesses in the reporting, and they'll maybe self-address themselves, or at least you can address them in reporting and be like, okay, here's where we need to work. Maybe it's the positive spin instead of focusing on the negatives, is like, how do we improve in these areas? Yeah. So
yeah, there's a quote by Peter Drucker, and I'm going to butcher it right now, but it goes along the line of, the whole point of leadership is to align the strengths of the organization so well that the weaknesses become irrelevant. Yeah, it's on my website.
There you go.
So
the task of leadership is to create an alignment of strengths in ways that make weaknesses irrelevant.
Yes.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Peter Drucker, the father of modern management. Man, that guy wrote some thick ass books on management and stuff, but he defined it all. It was crazy. It was pretty interesting. But yeah, alignment of strengths in ways that make weaknesses irrelevant. Definitely. There you go. There's one other thing you talk about, the hero aspect in leadership. Hero being capital letters. Tell us about what that means.
Okay, so this is based on something called psychological capital, which is just a really fancy psychological word for positive mindsets. And so that's where you see my positive psychology spin come into things again, right? I mean, I'm a therapist, so I deal with things like depression, anxiety, and so forth. And then there was a movement which it's relatively new if you look at the span of science and psychology, but it's the positive psychology movement, right? Which is saying, why do we not study thriving instead of just what's wrong? And so people who score higher on psychological capital actually do score lower on depression and anxiety. They also score all sorts of positive outcomes in the workplace, better job satisfaction, less likely to want to quit, and better behavior, like what do you call those, organizational behaviors that benefits the organizations. So what interested me about it is that it's very practical. You can develop these psychological states. They're not traits. They go up and down, but there are proven ways of how to increase them. I'll touch point quickly on what those 4 pieces are. Okay. So the acronym's HERO. The first one is just developing hope. Okay. And here's the definition of hope in the psychological world. Hope is when I can see the end goal that I'm trying to achieve, and I can also see the pathway towards it, or the goal paths towards it.
Ah,
So when I can see those two things, then I would score high on hope. When I can't see those two things, I would score low on hope.
oh, there you go.
Yeah, so it's not something like pie in the sky. It's actually just like, I have a client come in and they're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling really depressed. I don't like. So what's your dream? What's your vision? I don't know.
Wow, I don't know.
And that's then I know. Yeah, this person is scoring low on hope right now.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that's why when you do good strategic planning, when you do purpose, when you focus on that stuff, you're creating hope, not just for yourself, but for your whole organization.
Mm-hmm.
Second one is efficacy. So efficacy is another fancy word for confidence. And confidence is my belief in my abilities to make a positive outcome when I put effort into something.
Oh, there you go.
So when you have low efficacy, you're more likely to procrastinate on things. When you have high efficacy, you're more likely to go and do those actions.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the factors. It's not just... And another easy way to look at efficacy is the way to develop it. The best way, the strongest way to develop it is to set challenging goals and achieve them. So that's, again, leadership, right? When you put in, like, let's not just put in the simple, easy goals, but let's look at the challenging goals that drives or motivates the whole group towards it, and then keep them simple enough, not in terms of difficulty, but in terms of knowing whether we can do it or not. That increases everyone's confidence. Right?
There you go.
Yeah.
Hope. Everyone needs hope. Hope is the great. What's the word I'm looking for? Hope is the great thing that we look for in life. Hope springs eternal, I think is the phrase I was looking for. Cultivating hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism for success, psychological aspects of leadership. And I'm glad you're drilling down on this, the psychological aspects. And as a psychologist, you probably know better than most. And there is a psychology behind it. A lot of leaders, I ask them, what is your leadership style? What sort of methodologies do you entertain, or what do you think about yourself as a leader? How do you define yourself as a leader? And they don't know usually. They're just like, I don't know. I just kind of operate on the toolbox of what's always worked for me. And I'm like, how do you really know what that is? How do you know what really works for you? I don't know. I just kind of do the same thing every day and it seems to work. Well, maybe it could work better. That sort of thing is pretty interesting to me. How many people don't have a definition or haven't really thought about through their life. They're not intentional about their leadership style. And I find that very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people fall into it and practice does help. So you're learning on the ropes on the job, right? So some people are developing those leadership skills. They're just not naming them per se.
And you don't really think about it much. You just kind of go forward with it.
Yeah.
So there you go. So how can people onboard with you? How can they reach out to you, see if you're a fit, talk to you about the stuff that goes into your services, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. I mean, definitely visit my website. Right. Do the diagnostic, the quick, just to get some numbers to it, and then you can book a call with me from there, right? Or you can send me an email and we can talk about your results. I would be able to, for qualified clients, I would be able to offer maybe 4 per month a complimentary, like the full assessment for the prioritized leader, so that we can take a much deeper look into it with you. And then based on that, we can talk about whether it's a good fit and move forward with coaching. So that's the process. Yeah.
There you go. Give us the website one more time as we go out.
Yeah. So it's Happyhires.ca.
There you go. Thank you very much, Lindsay, for coming on the show and sharing your thoughts with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show.
There you go. Thanks for our audience for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTokity, and Chris Voss, Facebook.com. Thanks for being here. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you guys next time. And that should